So apparently psychedelics can cure PTSD.
Okay, good. Let's start growing them shrooms.
Yeah, let's take a look at the man who's trying to give veterans ecstasy.
I'm a veteran.
I run a nonprofit pharmaceutical company focused on psychedelics and marijuana. And so our mission is to try to develop these drugs through the FDA into prescription medicines, and then develop hundreds and thousands of psychedelic clinics around the country, and then expand the use of these substances beyond medicine to legalization and religious use, spiritual use. And what we've focused on, though, is MDMA, also known as ecstasy, for post-traumatic stress disorder. Right? So we did a complicated analysis of which psychedelic drug would be most likely to make it through the system first, and which patient population would be most sympathetic, that we're most likely to succeed. So we decided MDMA as the most gentle of all the psychedelics, and then we needed to pick a patient population that the bulk of American population was sympathetic to. And so we figured post-traumatic stress disorder, because the people that suffer from that, some terrible things have happened to them, they suffer from trauma, and in particular there's a lot of veterans that have PTSD. And so in our culture right now that kind of glorifies the military and veterans, if we could help veterans with their struggles with PTSD and reduce veteran suicides, we figure that that would be something that the regulatory authorities would be more willing to work on.
This guy is so smart. So basically he owns a cannabis and a psychedelic
He's just
company.
Gonna be
and so he was like
written off as a
he's
hippie.
like, yeah, so he was like, in order not to be, written off as a hillbilly or a hippie, he's like, we need
FDA approval.
He needed to pick a psychedelic that was kind of like not as intense, and then pick a patient population that the majority of the United States is already sympathetic towards. And, who better than veterans with PTSD to give MDMA?
So that guy in the beginning of our videos, in our previews, get shots because they gave him the wrong drug.
I'm not sure, but let's keep going.
Did you have any conclusions with MDMA?
Yeah. The first thing that we showed is that MDMA can be safely administered in a clinical setting. People have heard about ecstasy being used recreationally, and sometimes people overheating and from dancing all night and not getting adequate fluids and dying, or people have heard about people drinking too much water and then dying from hyponatremia from MDMA, or people have heard about panic reactions, all things like that. And so what we showed is that in a therapeutic setting that doesn't happen. So we're able to deliver MDMA-assisted psychotherapy in a safe manner. And then what we showed is that we had promising signs of efficacy, that it works. And we worked with the worst patients, meaning chronic, severe, treatment-resistant post-traumatic stress disorder. And we did 6 different phase 2 studies in Israel, Canada, the United States, Switzerland.
Wow, so he's saying not only is it safe, like in a controlled setting, but it works. And so he's tried it in a bunch of different countries, and they have a high efficacy rate.
How MDMA affects post-traumatic? Is there any kind of literature on that?
Yeah, there's been, what's amazing is if you go into Medline, which is the world's repository of scientific medical literature, PubMed or Medline, and you put in MDMA or ecstasy, there's over 5,000 different studies since the early 1980s. So there's an enormous amount of information. Most of it focused on what are the risks of MDMA, some of it focused on how does it work, and very little of it focused on therapeutic benefits. And that literature is all from us. But what we do know about how it works is pretty sophisticated, I'd say. So first off, there's a fear processing center of the brain called the amygdala. And MDMA reduces activity in the amygdala. So what that means is that you're not as reactive in a fearful way to emotional memories that come from trauma, fearful memories. People are more accepting of themselves and others, and they're not as triggered by the fear of the memories. MDMA enhances activity in the prefrontal cortex, where we are rational and put things in context. And also MDMA facilitates more interaction between the hippocampus and the amygdala, which is where memories get moved from short-term memory to long-term memory. PTSD does the opposite, that if you have PTSD, it changes your brain, and you have a hyperactive amygdala, so that you're always reacting in a fear to certain kind of memories, and then you have reduced prefrontal cortex activity, so you're not as rational, it's more instinctual reaction, and then it reduces activity in the hippocampus again. Now, MDMA also releases serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine in a complex sort of symphony of neurotransmitter release, which produces a lot of the mood. But MDMA also triggers hormonal release of oxytocin and prolactin. And so oxytocin has been called the love hormone, nursing mothers when you fall in love. And so oxytocin and prolactin are released, and they help create the bonding between the patient and the therapist, what we call the therapeutic alliance. So it's a very complex sequence of events that are triggered in the brain by taking MDMA. It would be very difficult to have sort of consciously intended ahead of time to develop a drug to do that. But luckily, we have MDMA, and now we've been finding out how it works, and that's been studied, some of it in animals already, which don't have higher level function, but it works with fear extinction and memory reconsolidation. So basically the idea is that when you have a memory, it's put together from different parts of your brain, and there's a part called episodic memory, which is about the episode, and then there's emotional memory about what feelings are linked to that episode. And for people that have trauma, every time they remember this episode, it comes with the fear related to it. And it's so strong that it comes to them in nightmares. They're triggered by things that remind them of the trauma constantly. But under the influence of MDMA, when you're feeling peaceful about the memory, we find that people's memories for the trauma is enhanced. Suppressed memories come to the surface, and because their fear is reduced, they're able to think about what happened, think about it in a different way, and then when the memory is reconsolidated, meaning, because it's not like what we normally think of, you take a book off the shelf, you read it, and you put it back. That's what we used to think about memory. But it's actually, you take a book off the shelf, you actually have to reprint the book to recreate the memory and to put it back into long-term storage. And so what we're doing with MDMA is shifting the emotion from fear to peacefulness, and from it's always about to happen from it's happened in the past. And so the episodic memory is actually increased because certain things come up from suppressed memories, but we're replacing the emotional memory with one of peacefulness, so that then the next time people recall it after the therapy, they can remember what happened, but they remember it from a position of peace and it's already happened. So we have a pretty good idea of how MDMA actually works for treating PTSD.
That's a really amazing.
Wow, so what he's saying is PTSD, people who suffer from PTSD, they basically have an overworking prefrontal cortex, which is like, or amygdala, which is like the fear center of their brain. And then what MDMA helps do is suppress like some of your actual brain chemistry so you can remember traumatic events without the trauma. And
without the feeling of
right.
the fear, you're feeling actually peaceful about it, so you can actually just get back. The episodic means your visual memory of what actually happened. So it's not it's like what happened, and you repress it because the emotional memory, which is any fear or happiness or whatever, is so strong that you can't process the trauma. And so what it helps you do is to remember the episodic memory without the emotional fear memory, and then you can process through it and not be so reactive to something that happened in the past.
Yeah, so MDMA helps people
process their traumas better.
Yes.
And fix what was maybe a natural response that helped them survive their past traumas or whatever. Fix that because it's no longer serving them. So it like helps them to, it's like, why do you do that? And a lot of people can't figure out why they keep doing a certain
Yeah, so
thing.
when you think about it,
and it's because they won't remember that because it's just too traumatic or whatever, but they're reacting constantly from it.
Right, so people who have suffered from abuse or like
wars,
neglect,
or,
any sort of
having
trauma.
to make really bad decisions or hard decisions,
But-
like no fault of your own, or
Yeah, really anyone who has suffered from literally any sort of I don't know, literally any sort of trauma, but through a lot of traumas can benefit from being able to relook at memories without fear.
Yes,
and that
because
is
they don't realize they're reacting to it.
And that is the therapeutic potential of MDMA. And what he was saying is like, to develop a drug with this in mind would be very hard, but luckily we already have it.
That's what I'm saying. We already had it, it went backwards because now I feel like the medical and a lot of other industries are accepting psychotherapy, like the psychology and the mental issues, even having physical effects and whatnot. We're understanding that way more after. But these drugs were there and possibly got popular in their use because it helped people do this without having therapy anyways. You know what I mean?
So if I remember, the guy who developed MDMA, he had taken like a plant-based psychedelic, I guess they're all plant-based, but
Entheogens. They call them entheogens.
Yeah, I think he took peyote, or someone will correct me.
Psychedelics.
But he created MDMA to try to recreate that experience. And
What
so
experience?
His psychedelic experience on peyote or some cactus. And so so
It's like, I ate a mushroom. I thought it was just edible, and then I totally tripped out.
yeah, it's like kind of like LSD that was developed as a pharmaceutical or for a pharmaceutical company, but which later got dismissed as not having any therapeutic value. But it keeps coming, it keeps kind of having its resurgence in like every generation since its development. Even the guy Albert Hoffman who invented LSD, he said like LSD called him because he kept thinking about it, I guess, since his first experience, which was actually an accident.
And like by way too much.
Yeah.
You would have thought it was a bad trip by the way he was describing what he saw. Like,
I mean, if he ingested any more than that, though, he would have passed out. You know what I mean? Like he ingested the perfect amount for him to want to do it again. Hi, everyone. Hope you liked the video. Remember to like and subscribe if you want to see more.
Happy 420 wherever you are. Bye.
And if you don't have buds, we're your buds.